The night was unusually still in Oakridge, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost staged. David Carter, a 42-year-old black veteran, lay in his bed, exhaustion pulling him into sleep after another long day at work. His home, a weathered wooden house passed down from his grandfather, was more than just shelter. It was memory. It was legacy. But at 2:17 a.m., the world shifted. A faint crackle echoed through the quiet, followed by the acrid bite of smoke. At first, David thought he was dreaming. But then came the sound, wood snapping, glass shattering, fire roaring as if alive. He shot upright, coughing, eyes wide. Flames licked the bedroom curtains, orange light painting the walls. The heat was suffocating, cruel. Barefoot, half-dressed, he stumbled toward the door, shielding his face as the ceiling groaned above him. Every step was war. By the time he burst out onto the lawn, the house was already engulfed, the porch collapsing into a storm of sparks. He fell to his knees, chest heaving, watching helplessly as generations of history burned before his eyes. And then, movement. Across the street, in the glow of the inferno, stood Karen Whitfield, the iron-fisted head of the HOA. A cigarette dangled from her fingers, its ember glowing like a mocking echo of the flames. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just watched. Her lips curled, not into pity, but into something darker. Satisfaction. The fire trucks arrived too late. By the time their hoses hissed to life, David's house was nothing more than a blackened skeleton, flames crackling like cruel laughter as they devoured the last of his family's legacy. Smoke billowed into the night sky, thick and choking, as neighbors spilled from their homes, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. David stood barefoot on the grass, his chest rising and falling, his body trembling as if the heat still clung to his skin. His world had turned to ashes in less than an hour. And then, she appeared. Karen Whitfield stepped through the crowd with that same rigid posture she carried at every HOA meeting. Her expression was carefully arranged, half pity, half authority. She placed her hand against her chest in mock sympathy and said, loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Oh, David, this is tragic. I've warned you about this old house for months. The wiring, the wood, all of it unsafe. Maybe now you'll rebuild something more acceptable." Her words slid like poison into the smoke-filled air. Neighbors nodded uneasily, some looking at David with suspicion, others with quiet relief. Karen had planted her seed. This wasn't misfortune, it was negligence. David's fists clenched at his sides. He could still see her standing across the street minutes earlier, cigarette glowing, eyes glinting with something far from concern. And in that moment, as the fire raged behind him, David swore silently, this wasn't over. She might think the flames had buried him, but he would rise from these ashes. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. David sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, a charred photo frame resting in front of him like a relic. It was all he had left, a picture of his parents smiling on the porch, their home whole and proud. He clenched it in his hands, silently promising he would not let Karen erase everything they had built. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The judge entered, stern eyes sweeping the room. David straightened, his pulse pounding. This was his chance. Justice was finally within reach. But then, the heavy courtroom doors creaked open. He turned, and froze. Karen Whitfield walked in. Not as a defendant dragged in shame. Not as a neighbor facing judgment. But in a tailored navy suit, files tucked under her arm, chin lifted in smug defiance. She crossed the aisle with the confidence of someone who believed the law bent for her. Murmurs rippled through the room. David's lawyer leaned in, whispering sharply, "She's representing herself." Karen set her papers on the desk, glanced briefly at David, and allowed a smile to curl across her lips. When she spoke, her voice was honeyed poison. "This case," she began, "is nothing but tragedy twisted into blame. My neighbor seeks a villain where there is none. I enforced rules. I did my duty. And now he wants to punish me for it. David's stomach dropped. She wasn't just playing defense. She was turning the court into her stage. The trial stretched on, each day heavier than the last. Karen thrived in the courtroom, her voice slick with confidence, her arguments polished like steel. She smiled at the jury as if they were neighbors at a block party. For a moment, David felt the fight slipping away. But then, everything changed. Late one evening, David's lawyer dug through a stack of HOA records, brittle pages that smelled of dust and ink. Hidden deep inside, half buried in administrative paperwork, was a letter. The date caught his eye, 2 weeks before the fire. The words chilled him. Failure to remove this eyesore will result in actions being taken by the board. But the signature line was empty. No board members. No official stamps. Just Karen Whitfield's name, scrawled in her neat, obsessive handwriting. The next morning, in front of a packed courtroom, David's lawyer placed the letter on the desk with a sharp slap. This, he declared, holding it high for the jury, is not enforcement. It is not regulation. It is harassment. Obsession. And it led to arson. The room gasped. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted. For the first time, Karen's face cracked, her composure flickering as her eyes darted toward the evidence. David watched her carefully. The smile was gone. In its place was something raw, fear. The tide had shifted. The jury leaned in. For the first time, they weren't seeing David as the complainer. They were seeing Karen for what she truly was. Cornered, Karen lashed out like a trapped predator. She rose from her chair, voice sharp, and began to dig into David's past. Old debts. A missed mortgage payment. A parking ticket from years ago. She painted him as careless, irresponsible, a man who let his life, and his home, fall into ruin. For a moment, the jury shifted uncomfortably. Doubt rippled across their faces. Karen smirked, sensing advantage. But then David stood. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply lifted the charred photo frame from the desk and held it up, his voice steady and unbroken. Yes, I've made mistakes, he said. But none of them justify what she did. This wasn't about rules. This was about hate. That house wasn't just wood and nails, it was my family's story. My grandfather's sweat. My mother's garden. My father's pride. And it was stolen from me in flames. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, his gavel resting idle in his hand. Then came the words David had been waiting for. The foreman rose, voice clear. On the charge of arson and harassment, guilty. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder. Karen's face twisted in disbelief as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The smirk, the arrogance, all of it crumbled. David stepped outside into the sunlight, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. His home was gone, but justice had risen from the ashes. They tried to bury me in flames, he whispered. But I'll rise higher than ever.